A third factor in the process of soil formation, or the third soil forming factor, is topography. Well, we can generally describe topography as the kind of the lay of the land. In other words, what is the slope, what direction is the slope, and what is the degree of steepness of that slope. Now, if you're talking about level land, then we get a certain amount of light or radiation or heat units per unit area of soil when the sun is directly overhead. But if you're talking about a slope that faces to the south here in the northern hemisphere, then that is going to receive more radiation per unit area than one that, say, faces to the north or even on level land. So slope modifies effective temperature, and we know that temperature has an effect on soil formation, but slope also modifies effective precipitation. If you receive rainfall at a rate more rapid than the intake rate, you're probably going to still get intake and movement of water through the profile on the level land, but when you start to get up on the slope, the amount of rainfall we get in say a year's time is not necessarily the effective precipitation that's available for soil formation at that site. A certain portion of that will likely not be taken in by that soil and will run off at some point in time. So slope modifies the rate of soil formation and development due to the effect it has on temperature, due to the effect it has on intake rates for water, and the amount of effective precipitation we have to promote the physical and chemical weathering processes at that location. So far we've discussed the effect of climate, the effect of living organisms, and the effect of topography or slope on soil formation and development. The next factor, soil forming factor, is time. And I think all we really need to say about time is that soil formation and development is a very time-consuming process. We measure the rate of soil formation that has taken place usually in periods of, say, 100 years or even more. We would expect in our climatic zone that we're in here, and this is just a very ballpark average figure, we're saying that it takes approximately 20 years of soil formation and development to take place to form a 1/2 inch of topsoil. Now that figure could be debated from one source to another, but I think you can see that even if it were 30 years or 40 years or half the time 10 years, soil formation is a very time-consuming process. All of these factors working together are contributing to the formation and development of the soil. The soils are a resource. We need to look at them that way and look at how we can best manage those to conserve the soil and not, in many cases, to accelerate this rate of soil formation to the point to where soils are going to develop and become less productive than what they would have been at an earlier point in time in their life cycle. Other than parent material, that obviously has an effect on soil formation, climate, the living organisms, the topography, and the time factor. The other factor related to soil development that I like to include is man, or man's activities. We have a very great effect on soil formation and development, especially those of us utilizing land for agricultural production. If we were to take this soil and put it into a conservation type of program where it was underneath constant vegetation and only had natural precipitation and weathering occurring on the soil, we conserve the topsoil that we have and see very little runoff and erosion from these types of locations. If, on the other hand, we are intensively cultivating this particular soil and utilizing it for cropping purposes, we are accelerating this rate of soil formation and development. That can be both good and bad. If we're talking about it good, if we're at a very young soil, meaning one that has undergone very little weathering, formation, and development, we'll actually see an increase in the productivity of that soil for a period of time as a result of intensive agricultural use. If, however, we are in a location where soils are already in an intermediate, moderate, or maybe even slightly advanced degree of weathering or development, an intensive type of agricultural utilization in those situations generally leads to soils becoming less productive over time. We are consuming nutrients. We're not necessarily putting all of the nutrients back. We're taking portions out of the field. We're seeing some of the more productive topsoil that is developed over a period of time being lost due to erosion. And at some point in time, these soils, once they've been utilized for heavy agricultural production for maybe 100, perhaps maybe even up close to 200 years, we see these soils begin to, I don't want to use the term play out, but become less productive and need more inputs in order to be able to produce the same amount of crop product or material. So I would summarize this section by saying that soil formation and development is a very constant, it's an ongoing process, that many factors are involved in determining what that rate of soil formation and development is going to be in a given location. We actually measure the amount of soil formation and development that has taken place by looking at the profile. You know, we've defined a profile earlier as the vertical cross-section of the soil from the surface down. When we look at the soil profile, if we are seeing a lot of horizon formation and development, if we're seeing very great distinction between one horizon and the next within that soil profile, then that tells us that this soil has undergone a more advanced degree of weathering or development. If, however, we are at a location and we look at a soil profile, we see very little distinction, very little horizon development, we see very little evidence of alluviation and illuviation or the downward settling and redeposition of materials in that profile, then that should tell us that these soils have undergone a much lower amount of weathering and development. And so we look at soil formation and development due to the effect that it has on the inherent fertility and also productivity of the soil. One other thing we need to discuss in this unit, we've kind of touched upon several of these along the way in our earlier discussion, but I'd like to discuss with you to finish up this unit, what are those processes that are occurring in soil formation? Now, some of these are physical only and some of them are chemical, and some processes are both physical and chemical.